It probably, because I did it earlier, so probably took it down.
I do have my son here and his family from Austin, and we're gonna do. Warmed it up for you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That's the one I was gonna. They're gonna hold off thing.
So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And we will begin as we do with our land acknowledgement statement. The Chinookan peoples known as the Clackamas and Cascades are the indigenous people of the land now inhabited by the city of Wood Village and other areas of the Columbia River. The village of Nechakli was located near today's Blue Lake Park. Ancestral life of these people included a seasonal round of resource gathering and stewardship from the Wapato fields and the fishing areas of the Columbia to the cedar and huckleberry gathering areas of the High Cascades. Introduced disease from early settlers dramatically reduced the number of these people. They signed the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855 with the United States government and were forcibly removed to the Grand Ronde Indian Reservation. We thank the descendants of these tribes for being the original stewards and protectors of these lands since time immemorial. We also acknowledge the systemic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that still impact many Indigenous Native American families today. We are honored by the collective work of many Native nations, leaders, and families who are demonstrating resilience, resistance, revitalization, healing, and creativity. And we are honored to be guests upon these lands. Now we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
With liberty and justice for all.
Now we'll open the floor for citizen comment on non-agenda items. Greg, was there any comment?
No comments.
Thank you, Greg. We'll close the floor then, and we will invite up Sergeant Gerkman with the public safety report.
There, thank you for having me, Mr. Mayor and City Council. As again. So for the last month within the city, there was 130 dispatch calls for service, which was a little bit lower than the yearly average, with those being considered emergency calls, which is right about par. Self-initiated activity was down a little bit for the year's average and quite a bit for the prior month. As you'll see on the traffic stops also, we're down quite a bit this last month, which is, I'm assuming, why the overall self-initiated activity count started to go down. I would imagine that's probably a large part due to the weather that we've been having. Stolen vehicles also were down in the month. There was 3 reported stolen vehicles, which is half of what the annual average is for a month. There were 6 vehicle crashes within the city, none of them being serious physical injury or resulting in death. And there were a couple of, I don't want to use the word substantial. There was a couple of calls that kind of stood out over the last month within the city. One of them being a robbery at gunpoint up at 242 in Cherry Park, where a firearm was presented and someone was robbed of some of those belongings. A suspect was not located that night and it's being investigated. Also, there was a call over off of Arata of an adult male suffering a mental health crisis, allegedly held his father at gunpoint inside of his house for several hours while he went through this crisis and fired a few rounds off inside of the house. Ended up taking his dad's car, leaving, going into Portland where he created some other issues there. He ended up being found and taken into custody the following day without incident, as far as I'm aware of. But we obviously got the call here in Wood Village that he had done those things here. So we participated with Portland in that investigation. Those are really the only calls that stood out to me. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Councilor Martin.
I missed Deputy Gerkman, I missed what you said about the traffic stops. They're down.
Yes, sir.
And what did you say?
I would just guess that it's probably due to the weather. We had that substantial rain event as well as just the weather getting much colder.
Okay.
It's probably just reducing self-initiated activity a little bit.
I also know last month, I think was the end of the ODOT safety grant.
Yep, that's very true.
And so there was kind of a ramp up over the last several months of traffic stops with that grant. But I do believe it was renewed, just that cycle hasn't started yet.
Correct.
Oh, that provided some additional dollars to pay.
Some overtime for traffic.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you.
Opportunity as well. Counselor Rios Campos.
No questions on here. I just, if you could just touch a little bit on kind of the assistance you guys have been lending the Reynolds School District at the high school, especially, as a parent of a student there, we got notification this Monday of an incident. And so one, I do appreciate the quick response, both on staff and as well as the sheriff's side of being able to detain the suspect and that nothing further went on. Is, how do you guys feel? You guys have been, I know it's a short amount of time, but how do you think the SRDs have been impacting? What areas do you see of opportunities? How
Right.
can we as a city, as community members, as parents, lend some assistance and, trying to troubleshoot some of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just being vocal and letting your opinions be heard. From our perspective, having the SRDs in the school has been great. I believe the school is feeling that way too. But really, I mean, we need to hear from parents and students how they're feeling about it, what their experiences are with that firearm being removed from the school this last week. That kind of went exactly how it's supposed to. The school identified some troubling activity. Law enforcement got involved, and thankfully a gun was taken out of the school. Without law enforcement being there, there just might have been a delay in response, obviously not having cops assigned inside the school, but it seems to be going very, very good from our perspective.
Did the report of the gun come from students?
No, it did not. There was some, the student was involved in some activity that got the school's attention. And they ended up intervening and then calling law enforcement.
Sergeant Gerkman is not part of the report, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but is there any, positive things to report as far as the Hope team goes and how well you worked with the navigators? Or
Yeah, the East County navigation team has been absolutely wonderful. They're fantastic partners. They're helping take some of our workload, some of that follow-up work where it's very phone call intensive, calling for resources, trying to get beds and such like that. They'll take on that workload so we could be outside in the camps even more than we were before. Just today, we had a lady named Teresa from Wood Village. We got her housed. She was living in the acres for a couple of years and got an RV. That RV ended up down on Sandy Boulevard, and she actually got housed today more permanently. So we were happy about that.
and I think it was back in July, because it's just before night out. Greg talked about, I think that was like the second week the navigators had been out with you, and they had gotten, it's like 4 people a driver's license and 11 people a birth certificate. Is there any way that we can get that as part of our public safety report, just a reflection on the successes that the Hope team had?
Absolutely. So we keep track of our own stats each month, and that would be very easy for me to produce. As I'm sure the navigation team keeps track of their own statistics. Some of those will overlap because we partner in a lot of it, but I could see if they could provide us their statistics as well, because that'd be good to see.
Yeah, no, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make a note of
I
that.
just add to that anytime we can get some information out in our newsletters about the navigators or other, support, success.
Yeah.
through the efforts directed at the homeless would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps you and me can talk about a future article as well as maybe even a brief presentation to the council. I know through you and your work,
Yeah.
you know, at a manager's level, we met the navigators and some
Right.
of the higher ups, perhaps, you know, a 20-minute presentation to council.
Oh, I think that'd be great.
After the first of the year, maybe a good, another good step.
Yeah, I think they would be really happy to do that. They're a great team, great people.
And I think also, you know, hearing from you guys, boots on the ground, like what we can do to support you more.
Yeah,
Right, like, you know, what can we focus on as a city with Greg to, you know, like
Yeah.
nudge other agencies, the county and so on and so forth. I think for me, that's important as well, because you guys know what you guys need and know what you
Mhm.
don't have.
yeah,
So just like you're saying, if
absolutely.
you don't hear from parents on
Yeah,
this issue,
sure.
we don't hear from
We don't
you
hear
guys
from us. Yeah,
on these issues, you know, I don't think we can help out.
yeah,
Got
no,
in
that's
trouble
great to
for
hear.
nudging last time.
Yeah,
We'll keep nudging.
yeah, and the Hope team would be happy to come and present stats or just come in every couple of meetings and just check in with you guys and tell you how things are going. You know, as far as supplies goes, the socks are always super helpful. You know, it's almost it's a type of currency to gain trust and break some of those barriers. But yeah, we can absolutely let you know what our needs are.
You know, and I just say this because I think it needs as much attention on the good stuff that's happening. My son, as I said here just a minute ago, my son and his family just flew in from Austin, Texas, and they're going to be here for a couple of days. But he's well, the last time I was here, I came down Marine Drive after I picked him up, and he's looking around and he's just shaking his head at what he's seeing on the side of the roads tonight or earlier today coming down the road. He specifically called out what's happened to all the RVs and that. And so I know that's not all county work there, but it means that the efforts and the attention and the work that's being done across your jurisdiction lines, I think is making a difference.
That's our hope.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Staff with anything for Sergeant Griffin?
Nope. Next month, we will have our new chief, Jen Shibanashi, presenting, but we will also have our former chief, Ryan Hakala. He'll be here as well to say his formal goodbyes and accolades to us for being awesome. But as always, Sergeant Griffin is just a wonderful partner who fills in anytime he's needed.
Just to fill in.
The
much.
fill in.
Yeah.
The fill in. The fill in.
Yeah.
Sure you're not auditioning for the job.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, next up is a review of bills paid for October. Does anybody have any questions about those on the top sheet or in the staff report? All right, then we'll move on to the consent calendar. Is there anything that we need to discuss on the consent calendar before we have a motion? And I'd entertain a motion.
Oh, actually, yeah, I mean, you like,
Because I was out of town, so it's just.
Yeah.
well, I wasn't here the whole time, but from what I could tell, you know, I think it was a really well put together event by our new community relationships.
Community enhancement and engagement specialist.
There we go.
I tried thinking of a longer title, but
But yeah, I think, you know, I think at the end of it, it worked out really well. We were pretty packed for about an hour and a half straight. So I think
Yeah.
the community received it really
it
well.
was Caroline's first big event with us. And I mean, she calm, cool, collective, kept things moving, was well organized. Yeah, we had traffic backed up to Birch a few times, but it wasn't for lack of, I mean, from when a car pulled into the first station, by the time they left, it was less than a minute and a half. So it wasn't lack of our process. There was just that many people liking this event. And we got some good feedback in the staff report that we'll bring up, you know, later, you know, the spring or summer, talk about Pumpkin Fest for next fall time.
No, I had loads of fun. It was a great day, great event. But entertain that a motion on the consent calendar.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Consent calendar carries. Next up, we have our municipal code update with Greg.
Something less awesome, unfortunately. The hope was that we would have had this back before you months ago. You know, I'll just pop open the presentation and give the highlights of the project. Part of this was intended for, like Councilor Amen, who wasn't really here for some of the work as a briefer on it. But certainly doesn't hurt to just tell you all where we're at. So since about 2020, we've been working on a comprehensive update to our municipal code, looking at a variety of factors, internal inconsistencies, where one code says one thing, another says a different about the same topic, looking at where all of the recommendations are. Despite it being, relatively modern, there are still a lot of hims and hisses, not just hims and hers, and now just removing all of the gender language because it's just not necessarily. And, other outdated provisions. We found stuff from the 60s and 70s still in there of things that we just don't do. So we need to clean that up. And that was the first run was done by a PSU fellow. And then the second run also by a PSU fellow who started working on incorporating the findings from the 2020 work into actual new code or actual changes. Unfortunately, it wasn't noticed till after that person left that those changes weren't done in track changes, which may not sound like a big deal at first until you realize when you go to make a clean copy to double check everything, there's not a clean copy. And then you're second guessing, was something deleted, not highlighted? Was something added, not highlighted and red? I mean, we had to start over, unfortunately. While all the areas were identified that we needed to work on, we were going line by line essentially, and we're double checking everything. And we can put these in 3 buckets. Housekeeping, generally these don't change any intent. They're not adding laws, changing laws. They're just, like I said, removing inconsistencies, updating language. When you look at our subsections, the formatting was all over the place. Sometimes it was subsection 1A, other sections it was A1. So we're making it just all very consistent throughout the book. And then our definitions, again, some sections are at the beginning, some at the end, some at the very, very beginning. So we define, if we can define it once, we define it once. If it's related to that section, we're defining it for that section. Just that way it's very clear for any reader what the intent is. Within this process, there's been 2 required changes that need to be made. One is to our solid waste management code, and that's related to the revisions to the commercial food waste recycling program. We already have the code. What changed were the applicable dates. Is it something we ought to do? Yes. Does it matter if our dates don't change? Just had earlier timelines and we're already getting, people abiding by the program, but it's something we need to, clean up in the code. The other one is for our industrial pretreatment program. This gets updated probably every 3 to 5 years, I would say, based on DEQ, EPA, updated regulations. And this is for basically heavy industrial users that have some sort of process and they need to pre-treat it before they send it off to the sewer to remove heavy contaminants or otherwise. And generally some of the different chemicals or compounds, the limits change, or there's some additional testing requirements. And that's what this one is here. Then it looked like in all of that work outside of housekeeping and required, there are about 2 optional ones. We could make them, not make them, but they were substantive changes to the code. And one I'm sure you remember very, very distinctly was weekend construction noise. So I believe that meeting went on for quite some time. That the current code, it's not very clear on weekend construction work. It's just not optimal. And in that discussion, it was talked about what could be reasonable for construction work on weekends. And it was 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. for non-commercial exterior work. Something that's going on inside a building, noise impacts are de minimis anyway, but this is homeowners doing a siding project, building a shed, building a deck, whatever that may be. That's what the intent of that one was. The other one, large vehicle parking, because the current code calls out vehicles over 8,000 pounds, 21 feet long, are prohibited in parking in residential areas. In talking about that, it seemed kind of interesting given the fact you can have an RV in your driveway, just can't live in it. And that's over 8,000 pounds, over 21 feet. Some pickup trucks off the lot are, 10,000 pounds and over, near 21 feet.
Missing that.
Yeah, I know. And so the thought was, well, you can make it permissible, but you still can't block, the issue is you have a big vehicle in a driveway, you could block your neighbor's driveway from getting out safely. So as you're not impeding sight lines, it's not really an issue. So those were the 2 that we had flagged as ones that you had for discussion that do change the code, but weren't required, weren't part of housekeeping. And, the question is, one, do you still want to move forward with those optional items? And, in thinking about what we've gone on over the past several months with different codes and policies, what kind of outreach do you want for us to do on the optional ones? It probably doesn't make a lot of sense for housekeeping or required. There'd be a lot of technical background work we'd have to do to educate on why these are being made, but don't actually necessarily change the code versus the optional ones. Those do change the code and it's very cut and dry what it's doing. But we want to ask the question as we're wrapping this up before we take it back to you all for adoption, what do you want to do for outreach specifically on those two items? And that's where I'll pause for a moment.
And the optional items, Greg?
It's the construction noise and the large vehicle parking.
Yeah. Those two items.
And just what were your thoughts on outreach?
Do we have to have? I mean, I could envision us, opening up the building and, putting out cookies and not getting anybody on either. So, I mean, does it have to be a community newsletter?
Newsletter, social media, website, just simply the notice of the council meeting that it'll be adopted at. You can run the spectrum.
Could we also do, I think, those are great, the newsletter, but like, utility bills and things like that, more people are.
Utility bills tricky because we only get about that much room on a single sentence to put something in. And we only get the one line, so you can't even translate it. And again, it only goes to the utility account holders, which unlike the newsletter goes to every address.
Okay.
The utility bills only go to the account holder.
Is there any timeline here?
Well, I mean, we would at a staff level, we promised we'd bring this back completed. So we'd like to at least finish the work relatively soon. In terms of the timeline of when you want to bring it forward or focus on these two items, it's your it's your call.
The question I'm asking is, it may be a couple of newsletters before we move forward. The holiday times are coming.
Our next newsletter is not till January anyway.
It's not the next one.
Next one's not till January.
Because I mean, we could also use like the tree lighting event as a form of, at that time, understanding that, we will have some folks that aren't Wood Village residents, but I think, it could just be an opportunity also.
It's
It's
just,
where you guys will already be here, so.
3x5, check these changes to your municipal code, put the, website on there, put the specific line of code, chapter.
I mean, we could make it, relatively simple for those that may be interested in it as a first blush, and then maybe the newsletter article for the second round, then take it to you all February, March time, because it would be good to get our industrial pretreatment adopted. That one does have a timeline. Everything else, it's things that are good to get done, but nothing's driving it.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, so we'll kind of do a primer at the tree lighting, followed by a newsletter article, and we'll go from there. Excellent.
Except then, Greg, thank you, is
We're not rushing you through these. Just
That's right.
No, not at all.
Good. This is next agenda item, I'm sorry, Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde meeting recap.
All right, well, 2 of the 3 of you were at the meeting, and 2 of the 3 of us are at the meeting. So some of it will be very much review, but you can just, double check my work and recap. So yes, this is intended as just a recap, get on, additional public record of the meeting and what we did. The agenda for the council to council, we toured the Chachula Center, Chachula, and I got a little slide about that. We then did a tour of, I believe it's phase 3 of their elder housing project, which is pretty phenomenal. And then we had our council to council.
You would
So-
like those. You would like those fully soundproof to the outside with a net zero utility.
I'm sorry, I missed the tours. cultural center too, but.
Yeah, so
that
this was
was
my second at the T'Challa Center. And what I didn't know is they actually do a revolving exhibit through it that changes, I believe, 3 to 4 times a year. But they incorporate it so well into the standard exhibits, you wouldn't necessarily even know it's a different exhibit. That's what's kind of fascinating about it. Another thing about the word T'Challa, it's called the place of burnt timber. And so back when the Grand Ron were forced to be relocated to that reservation, there was a devastating wildfire shortly thereafter or concurrent with. And now you look at the area now, it's a thriving forest and a thriving place. And that was kind of the thought of the name for this too, is that the tribe went from devastation to trying to thrive. But certainly the center, we learned about the ancestral life and how they're trying to keep those traditions alive through basket weaving, canoe making, fishery, all the crafts part of it, as well as then more kind of modern art and culture. And it was a tribal artist that was featured who did, I think it was an impressionist, I believe art is. I'm not an art connoisseur, but very, very powerful center, very powerful stories. And, it's open, I think, every day from 10 or 11 to early evening time. So for anyone listening out there, if you're on the way to the coast, to Lincoln City or Pacific City, it's worth the stop.
It's just interesting how other work that we've been involved with kind of came up too, particularly when they talk about the Columbia River and, just society that thrived there in the marshland and before there was ever levees or anything like that. And then we also learned that the CH at the front of a word means place of. So the T'Challa is a place of burnt timber, but any word that has CH in it at the beginning is a place of, and we'll probably have some meaning and explanation to it if you really look it up.
Yeah, one thing, you always learn something new. And the site of the longest plank house from the tribes, the bands, was actually where PDX sits right now. And when I asked, since they're doing the giant remodel and rebuild of the airport, I said, what's going to be incorporated into that? And the response was not enough.
Response was what?
Not enough. That's something I think most people don't know, is that PDX sits on what was the largest plank house, which was their winter, basically, home. So very, very powerful. Encourage anyone to stop in. Another wonderful tour we got was of the Elder Housing Project. This photo was not one that we took. I should have taken a photo. This was done in August time when they were pouring the foundations. Now there's sticks in the air and you can actually walk through what will be the homes. And it's a 24-unit mixed income duplex development. So 12, foundations, 24 units in partnership with HUD and Energy Trust. And that's where they're being built with a 2x6 spray foam insulation, solar panels. So they're essentially net zero for energy consumption. And because this is elder housing and there's health concerns and they've had power outages, they're being built in with plugs for generators. So they can be kept cool, or running medical equipment during, prolonged power outages, whether due to weather or fire event. And just the layout was very thoughtful of, kitchens face the front street so they can watch the neighbors' comings and goings. How the garages abutted each other, so you get that max separation between units, and how all the kind of mechanical room was accessed from the outside. So their maintenance people don't have to enter the home to, change filters or check on water heaters or furnaces or the like. So just a lot of thought went into it. And it's quite the development. And then we get to the meat of the meeting, which was actually probably the shortest amount of time. It was a mix of our council members, their council members, and staff members. And we talked a lot about the trust application, where it's at in its process, and spent the bulk of the time talking about traffic. And made a little map of kind of key intersections. So the project itself has 16 involved intersections, but some of them, they're just involved. There's no real mitigation or big impacts. But so Halsey at Fairview Parkway, and that's where Fairview has in its plan a roundabout. That's kind of a key intersection, and how that may or may not work or function, or how to make a roundabout function during peak times. When we get to then Fairview Parkway at Gleason, more or less already built out for that. Similar to Gleason at 223rd, you just have to complete that extra turn lane that's already just kind of sitting there, but not striped or signaled. Then in front of the parcel itself, there's something needed at that intersection. They have to extend the roadway. They know there's work to do there. Halsey at 223rd, I believe they said it was the most constrained intersection and the one with the least amount of options because lack of right of way, existing business. There's nowhere to grow the intersection. At Halsey at Wood Village Boulevard, there's talk of adding a signal. I'm sure the folks living in the Oaks and Woods wouldn't mind that. It might be a little easier to get in and out for them. And then a signal at Wood Village Boulevard and, I don't know, I'm not sure what they'll name their roadway, but the cross one is there at Riverwood Drive. So those are the main intersections impacted by this. And the plan is in the coming months for their team, staffing contracted traffic professionals to start meeting with, our team, Fairview's team, the county, and talking about what mitigations to do at specifically kind of these intersections and what phasing is done for them. There's a lot of talk of what needs to be done kind of right away and what can be, some funds set aside for future improvement. So that led to the other kind of piece is that the application still seems years out. Unfortunately, this is going back, several years now, at least 2, almost going on 3. And there's probably 3 to 5 more to go before we even know what's going to happen at this site is kind of my take. They didn't say a specific year time frame, but it was years, certainly. And there was talk of an environmental impact analysis versus environment impact statement. The key difference is one takes about a year to do, the other takes about 5 years to do. And, unknowns at the federal level, unknowns at the state level in terms of its approval. The key piece out there is this is still years out. The overall plan itself is relatively the same. It's an entertainment complex with gaming, with a hotel. And while they've reduced some of the table games and other games due to the traffic concerns, it's still, I believe they said, larger than Spirit Mountain in terms of its size. So still very robust center. And they, since that's driving the traffic, they haven't focused on what the other features of it will be. I know we've had talks, whether it's, arcade, spa, family friendly something. They haven't worked those details because that's not what's going to drive the traffic, which is driving the bulk of their application. No date set for a future council to council, but typically Station and I meet quarterly, and I imagine we'll be meeting sometime after the first of the year to set up then those discussions on traffic, and you'll certainly get updates as those occur.
That was interesting to learn. Like Greg said, there was the number of intersections impacted, numbered in the teens, but a lot of them they could simply mitigate by, saying, well, what if we design it with the entrance off of this street and this many machines? Or the entrance off of this street and this many machines or table games. And so if they, they cut a bunch of them off the list just with some reconfiguring of what the casino floor would look like.
Which then they have to then go, okay, if that changes then for this intersection, what does that impact this? I mean, they really have to then, I've never done a TIA. I don't think I want to. It certainly, there's a lot of science and art that goes into it for sure. But they're also looking at transit options and they're looking 360 at how to serve the site.
And they definitely want to partner with us, but appreciated that we were holding off on the crosswalk somewhere in the neighborhood of the Wood Village Boulevard.
Yeah, we know there's a need for it specifically, this site. And so we started those conversations about what could we do to put something in sooner rather than later, but that what we put in doesn't have to get torn out. It actually, you can build upon it for their future development. So it just adds on to it. And I think there's some options that we can look into. Once we complete our first set of three, we'll look at the next set we're doing and, there's a need here and we want to meet that. Whether this development gets built out in 2 years or 20 years, we need to serve the people now.
That particular area there, a crosswalk's needed there, whether in any event.
Yeah, in any event, it'd be great to have, the lit rapid flashing RRFB.
Yeah, RRFB.
Pedestrian activated rapid flashing.
Yep.
Yeah, beacon thing. One there, another one probably, in the center somewhere else on Wood Village Boulevard would be great to have. And that's where we're trying to target for our next set.
What impact does new development have with traffic, and does that fall on their responsibility?
So for example, I'll just use like the Chick-fil-A and Chipotle, since they've, one's approved, one's in process. So when the town center had its master plan completed initially, both in 2000, the updates in 2005 and 2017, the traffic impacts with that get updated as well. And as long as the development that goes in fits those parameters, it's already assumed that the system was built to handle it. So when the town center was formed 20 years ago, there were a series of improvements around the system. Some built then, some just added on later. So if a development goes in and essentially fits the bill, they don't actually have to do anything. But as we talked in the planning commission specifically for Chick-fil-A, while not their responsibility to fix kind of the wonkiness, I'll call it, of Wood Village Boulevard North, where it kind of merges and opens up to a turn lane. Some people don't know that there's a left turn lane. There's an opportunity there to actually look at that and, call it fix it. What the fix is, we're not quite sure yet, but there's definitely an opportunity to optimize it a bit more. But that doesn't necessarily just rest with Chick-fil-A to do that, because they're fitting the built parameters. Now, for example, had it not been Chick-fil-A, but I'll just say Costco, not that a Costco could fit on that site, but for argument's sake, that's a heavy traffic generator beyond what the center was built to accommodate, then yes, their traffic impact analysis would show that they're over impacting the site and they would have to do a proportionate amount of improvements to the infrastructure. So again, let's just say this intersection here was failing. It's not, but let's say it were. They wouldn't be responsible for fixing it 100%, but they'd be responsible for fixing the increment that they went over. And so let's just say the cost to fix it was $1 million. They may have to pay, 200,000 of that project, and then it would accumulate and then build out. Or the county would build it up front and then collect it later on from other future development. There's a lot of ways you can slice this and dice that. And the tricky part is it's on the county's end, because these aren't city-owned streets. Our role is different than if it'd been city-owned streets.
And we've started conversations with the county regarding Wood Village Boulevard and the striping and lane configuration.
And
So we've already started those conversations.
And that was one of those things that wasn't an issue until it was an issue. And what kind of highlighted that, the Fred Meyer fueling station has brought a lot of more traffic in that area the last several years, with Lowe's being more populated and different building, different users of the center has brought a lot more traffic. That's brought, hey, this is a problem. And the county agreed when they oh yeah, that is a little different, we'll call
Well,
it.
I think the big impact is that the Safeway also shut down.
Yeah.
And then, their fuel station, even though it's still there, it's very underutilized.
The town center is definitely, it may not look it from maybe some of the parking spaces over on the west end, but around the Wood Village Boulevard area, it's hopping.
Yeah, it is.
Else, from those that were at the council?
Well, the one thing we kind of had a conversation was, when we were at the Cultural Arts Center, I think this kind of goes to have a conversation with the Parks Commission, but, we are looking at adding some type of art or some type of figure statue in the park. I think it'd be very wise things. And I think an important thing if we included the Grand Ron in some of this conversation, because they have some beautiful art that I think we could utilize in our existing park. And then when the wetlands, gets developed, utilizing it there as well. I think it just kind of fits our identity and, honoring them here as well. And then I think it builds on a partnership.
I think that's a great idea, particularly for the Wetlands Park, which we've already invited them to name. And we also talked about, that they can, when they rotate an exhibit, that they could maybe set us up with that artist. And when they make the rotation and take that artist out, that artist could maybe have a couple pieces come here and be displayed in City Hall.
I think all of that is real important to start building some public awareness and support should this move forward in a way that any event, there's going to be pushback. Just if there's more traffic, there'll be pushback, let alone what they're, gambling machines. And I think that anything we can do to start building some public support and some recognition that this land was their land would help. So I absolutely, wherever we can start to, recognize, it's not promoting, it's recognizing that this land not always under the weight.
Yeah, we've had a lot of ideas for the wetland parks in terms of, educational boards and how it relates to with all the native plantings and how those plantings were used by native peoples. With boards and placards, but it was as a new idea in terms of the Parks Commission wanting, some featured art or something here. Their idea was a Bigfoot versus maybe using more of some native art or folklore or something that is interesting and educational and meaningful. Not that Bigfoot's not saying to those out there.
And it was it felt a little warmer than past meetings to me too. Not that the others weren't by any means. But food was good and we got another necklace, but instead of, me sitting, 2/3 of the way around the room from Chair Kennedy, I sat beside Chair Kennedy this time. Have, just a really nice conversation about, different elements of our governments and, what do we do and they do and benefit our residents. That was nice. It felt, it's never really felt like it's us against them, but it felt more like it was us, just us this time around.
They said something, and it's the first time I've heard it. Don't know why I hadn't thought about it. Look at the services that they do for their members, whether it's housing, education, healthcare. They said that we do all the things of the county and have no tax base. And so all their efforts, whether it's the casino, their timber, their other endeavors, that's what funds their operations, and just hadn't thought of it that way. And then you look at their projects like their elder housing project and what they're able to do and build. It's quite the model for people serving and helping people.
That's a model that we all should be paying attention to
for building homes.
Not only are they being intentional, they're being environmental friendly. They're literally thinking 5 steps ahead. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks volumes.
Well, what you just described there is really, I would echo, it wasn't there, but design.
There was a lot of thought in that design.
Really about who's going to live there.
I don't know why I'm looking. John wasn't there. Lindsay wasn't there. I was reaching over for head nods, but no, I'm not going to get them.
He's like, you're on your own.
The big takeaway is nothing's going to happen soon so when we get guests or community members asking about it, it's still several years out, I think is the key message. But they're still working on it, and they want to do it in a way that's meaningful for them, meaningful for the community, and reducing those impacts.
And while they talked about, reducing machines or tables in order to change some of the traffic impacts, we asked them straight up, well, how do we explain what's going to be there to people? Because we're talking now about the big timbers and, the live Wapatoa grass roof and just, really looking like our area looks, like we like Wood Village to look, and they said you can go ahead and keep telling people that.
Yeah, haven't really changed. While the gaming floor seems to have shrunk, the building itself hasn't seemed to.
Yeah, that rendition we had.
Mhm.
That's nice. That's it.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Probably the only one that wasn't.
John
Oh,
didn't make, Seth was there,
okay.
Becky was there. Next up then.
Brought me along.
Just close your presentation.
Oh, that, the meetings with them is always. It's always-
Yeah, I did. I was trying to share a screen and I just,
I think we have an opportunity. They shared us, they gave us a tour of the gaming floor, which never been.
trying to hide.
It, like the mayor said, it felt very different.
Yeah.
It felt more of a really
Camaraderie,
developing
Relationship.
relationship. So, we did invite them to come to us here and they've invited us.
City Hall after dark.
Clocks got set back. It's dark out early.
Yeah.
So the first installment of City Hall After Dark. It's been a year in the making.
It's HB 2088. Property tax changes, so we get off to a hot start.
Oh, you jumped right in with both feet into the deep end. So included in your council packet is a staff report, which shows some of the backup. I'll just go through. There's a lot of graphs and data. And I've kind of got a narrative set up, but if at any point something you need clarification or anything, just feel free to jump in and we'll kind of take it piece by piece. So. All right, we're going to talk about Oregon's property tax system, which I tried to find some graphics that represented how it's currently constructed.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
And this also is going to serve for our public works crew of things not to do when excavating big trucks or transporting playground equipment.
During those upcoming safety.
Exactly. So starting off very high level, talking about tax bases. So within the US, there's really three major ways you can raise revenue for government operations. Sales tax, income tax, property tax. And the reason why those all work is they all kind of have built into them some factors that accommodates both rising prices and growth. So for property tax, it's as housing prices go up, revenues go up. And as you add more houses on and new growth comes on, you have the money available to provide services to accommodate that new growth. And so this graph just kind of shows you can pick any three of the tax bases, but they all kind of grow consistently together. What's wrong with Oregon? There's a lot of issues with the property tax system. We're going to focus on a particular part of it, which is funding city services. So our property tax system was designed to collect revenue to maintain city, county, and school services. And that system is not functioning well, as you can see from the pictures that I used to represent it. Primarily, and you can see this with the city, and this is a slide that's included in some of our 5-year forecasts. In the late 90s, property taxes paid for our public safety services. Currently, they do not. And every year that percentage goes down, which means that every year we have to come up with money from something else in order to backfill that, or we reduce services. So remember I said good taxation system accounts for both cost increases and new growth. So said the property tax system is broken. Which part of it is broken in terms of revenue generation? So we have taxable assessed value, and our permanent rate of $3 and change gets assessed on that every year. That's capped at 3% growth. So is that the right level? And is that why we're in a hole? Well, this graph shows kind of the change proper consumer price index since 1995. And it just shows what a 3% growth would look like. So the orange line is 3%, the CPIU is the blue line. You can see that it, for a number of years, was tracking pretty well along. We had a good 10-year window that everything was, we were below 2-3%. And then we're starting to catch back up here. So we might end up actually getting close if our inflation continues the way it has for another couple of years. But in general, this graph does not flash bright alarm signs in terms of this is not going to work. So if the problem is not inflation, then what's the issue with the system? So before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about the mechanism for how new properties or improvements to properties get on the tax roll. So there's something called a change property ratio. It's defined in statute, but not specifically mentioned in the constitutional amendments that change the property tax system. It's a countywide average by property class of the taxable assessed value to real market values on a property by property basis. And the reason why they put that in statute is it was trying to be an equitable way to add new properties to the tax roll compared to existing properties. Jeff, he's not here, but equity is a big issue with the current system. If you go, and there's a lot of articles you can Google about the tale of two cities or the tale of two gas stations where you can have two houses in the same neighborhood, same value. One has 3 or 4 times as much, pays 3 or 4 times as much in property taxes as their neighbor. And that's not uncommon throughout the state. We can probably find some good examples here in Wood Village of how that's happened. So designed to be equitable, but ultimately ended up with a very inequitable system. This just kind of is a little bit of a graphic of how that's calculated. So every year the county looks at every house within, we're going to do houses because that's easy within residential. It calculates the real market value for house 1 versus the taxable assessed. And then it calculates that for house B. And it does that for every house that's in the county. And then they average that all up property by property and come up with a countywide one. So when you build a new house, that same ratio or same tax break gets provided to the new property. So it's kind of, that was the idea of fairness. This shows an example of what's happened since then is you have some houses that have a lot of real market value growth. You might have some houses that actually go backwards in real market value. And so what ends up happening is that the new house gets the average weighted by value of all of the houses within the county. And generally, I mean, real market value, a number of years ago, I took some of the state's assessor classes to try and figure out what real market value is. That did not help. It's generally correlated with cost or sales price, but they have some formulas and some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't, but it's kind of their own process. But generally speaking, over the long term, it ends up being about correlated to the cost of building a new home or the fair market value of selling a home.
What would have been wrong? I mean, you'll see when I answer this question. What would have been wrong with just taking 1995 value of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in this neighborhood and taking the brand new one that's 3-bedroom, 2-bath in this neighborhood and saying it would have been worth this much, it would have paid this much property tax in 1995, and then just go 3% for each year between the gap of 1995 and when the house was built.
So I over the course of some years, I have talked with some of the people who worked on turning Measure 47 into Measure 50. And the answer is that this is just the method that they picked. There's a lot of ways that you could create, and their big concern was they wanted to rewrite Measure 47 into something more workable, but keeping in line with, they also didn't want any challenges on the constitutional tax fairness principle. They wanted to come up with a system that would pass any legal challenges that might come out of that. And so this was their attempt. You done, to be fair, done kind of at the last minute as the legislature stepped in after Measure 47 passed to try and stave off how they were talking about implementing that and coming up with Measure 50. So it was all kind of done under the gun, so to speak. And so they had to pick a method, and that's the one that they picked.
Shocked that there hasn't been a legal challenge from the people that pay 3 times the amount, same neighborhood.
Jeff said he would have filed a legal challenge, but he actually benefits from the system, so he doesn't have to. He says, I can't sue because I actually benefit from it. He said he paid somewhere around 20 to 25% of his real market value as his property tax base, which is not uncommon, especially in Multnomah County. Whereas you have some other parts of the county that pay close to 100%, which is generally, that is parts of the county that are have lower real market values and are less affluent. So it's a big issue in East County, not a big issue in Portland. Portland can keep voting in all the taxes they want. They actually don't pay them because they get compressed up against their Measure 5 rate. And so the bulk of the taxes shift eastward, which is part of the reason why with the formation of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, that was the East County cities, primarily Gresham, fought them getting property tax authority, is that it would disproportionately be paid by East County. So why doesn't the CPR work? You set up the system, seems like it's fair. You have lots of people making all sorts of calculations in very large databases. I don't want to say it was an assessor make work or an assessor job security program, but it turned into one. So the biggest issue is the taxable assessed value is 3%. Real market value doesn't have a cap. And this is the Portland Case-Shiller Home Price Index since 1995. You know how the other line was, our inflation line was under the 3% growth. This one is not. Our actual annualized growth is closer to 6%. And so why is that a problem? Early on, when I was working on this in Gresham, you have to, I was younger and single and had more hair and less weight around the midsection. You'd have to describe to people what it is you do, and I would very cheekily respond. I end up spending most of my time explaining fractions to people that I work with because a lot of it is ratios. And so what they did was they set up a ratio of taxable assessed value divided by real market value. That's great. Taxable assessed value was designed to capture that inflation, that 3%. Real market value captures both inflation and growth. It's one of those, that's why it's widely used for property tax. When you want to tax properties, it's why it's widely used as you want real market value growth, because that automatically captures both growth and inflation. So when you have an equation where you have inflation on the top and inflationary factor times growth on the bottom, doing this to Greg on my whiteboard, you cancel both the inflations out, and what you end up with is a declining ratio. So
Not in fractions, you could only cross out the top and the bottom if they were equal.
unless they're multiplied together, in which case you can factor them out and then eliminate them.
Yeah, to use the whiteboard.
Don't feel bad. Greg and I spent a while talking through this. So what ends up happening is that in an average year, you lose about 2.5% a year. Because there's that real market value is growing at close to 6%. Taxable assessed value growth is capped at 3%. And so how does this translate? So why is the CPR important? In order to revenues. If you spend $500,000 on a house, and that's your real market value, and your CPR is 0.8, then your taxable assessed value is 400,000. You are capped. You can pay at 1.5% real market value, which means the most that you're going to pay in property taxes is 6,000. You build the same house and the CPR is 0.6, then your taxable assessed value is 300,000 and your maximum tax bill is 4,500. So you just cut a third off of your tax bill by having a lower change property ratio. And the change property ratio for Multnomah County started in the mid-70s and is now countywide in some area, in some classes below 40%. So it's half. So new properties, we're getting about half as much revenue on a house built in 2020 as we would get in a house built in 1997. And you can't continue to provide services on half the revenue. Another way to think about this is fire district. Let's say you build a fire district and you say, in order to provide services in the fire district, we know that we need $1,200 from every house every year to provide this service. Awesome. So you set up your permanent tax levy so that you on average get that $1,200 you need from every house to provide service. Well, what this is saying is that 20 years down the road, you're going to get $600 for a new house and you're still going to have to provide that $1,200 worth of service. So what you do is you either find a new way of raising revenue or you provide less service to the people who are existing in order to provide equitable service to those new houses, which is the circumstance we find ourselves in. That's why that's kind of, and it's very gradual because again, it's not a huge cut in any one year. But if you're losing that 1%, 2%, 3% a year on new houses, eventually you get to the point where you're getting half as much and you're getting a quarter as much. And at some point down the road, if you want to get really dire, which is why economics is a black hat profession, is you don't get anything. You run this out long enough and it just doesn't work.
And it's not just houses, it's all development. We're using houses for a simple example, but it's all development. And that's where me specifically gets really irked when consultants or others say, we need to give property tax breaks to incentivize development. We already giving a 50% tax break from what they ought to be paying had this, everything else equal.
Yeah. And we're doing it randomly, not necessarily for any specific purpose. It's just based on what your tax was assessed at. For existing properties, did you live in an expensive area in 1995? Well, too bad, so sad. If you live in an inexpensive area that has since gentrified or redeveloped, you get a great tax break. I think South Waterfront, inner Northeast Portland, like those are great places to live because the property tax bill is half or a quarter of what you'd pay if you moved somewhere else in the city.
In 1995, I was probably drunk, but I didn't live in Oregon and I didn't own a house at the time. But what I hear about those times is that Oregon was going up like crazy on property tax.
Yeah.
One of the fastest growing property taxes in the nation. And people felt like it was going to be unchecked, but we built, no way to change things to see if we, now we're at 5%. So we change from 3 to 5 and try to at least keep up a little bit. But also that 5% that it's turned out to be now is way less than they anticipated it would be when they changed the Constitution.
Yeah. Yeah, this system, and I want to be clear, the system's only broken today. It worked great in 1997, but every year we move away from there, and every time the reality on the ground changes, the system doesn't change. Imagine if everyone behaved as they did in 1997, like what kind of chaos that would cause 25 years later. Cell phones, iPhone, not everyone has a computer. Wi-Fi is probably something that's an acronym for some random government agency, not actually what you use for the internet. There's been a lot of changes in 25 years.
Well, and even California, I think it's Proposition 10, the basically companion measure for Oregon's property tax in California. They even do every 10 years a full reassessment of properties. So again, areas like Northeast Portland that had been less than desirable, less than optimal for some, it was homes for many. 10 years later, it's a booming area. It's very popular. Well, they'd be reassessed at its current market value if it'd been California. So if California built in
Some
an
fail
option.
safes.
Yeah,
We did not.
No.
could be wrong, but I think I read at some point in time that there are like 17 states that had some artificial construct other than real market value that computed your property tax, and 15 of them indexed it. Oregon is one of the 2 that didn't.
Keep Oregon weird. Well, this is what weird ends up looking like. And so I showed you the kind of that equation, and that's kind of the theory behind it. What actually happened, you can see that what the actual county change property ratios by class, residential, commercial, multifamily were in 1997, what they actually are countywide in 2022, and what if that simple equation would have predicted. So residential is a little better off. Commercial's about even, and multifamily is lower than what you would have predicted. So it's not 100% accurate, but in general, the trend over the long term is what you would expect.
And so we got to go to the 60% when the legislature allowed for municipals to change their change property ratio.
We'll get to that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's just interesting how quickly it will deteriorate.
It's not there anymore.
Yeah.
So that's the next House Bill 2088. What that did. So this is the actual section of the Oregon Constitution that was changed. And that's where you can see the ratio of the average maximum assessed value to real market value of properties located in the area where the property is located in the same property class. So what House Bill 28 did was it focused on the word area. So area was defined in the constitutional amendment. So making a change to the Constitution requires a vote of the people. Countywide was what they put in the statute. So that was done by the group of legislators and tax assessors that built the statutory code for the legislature to approve. Statutory changes can be made by the legislature and do not require a vote of the people. So what House Bill 2088 did was it asked that rather than countywide, in counties that were larger than I think 700,000 population, so only Multnomah County, cities could elect to have their change property ratio calculated by city rather than by county. So this first happened in the tax year. This happened in the legislature in 2017. We first saw it on the tax rolls in fiscal year 18-19. And here's kind of what the different change property ratios were when they did this, breaking us off. And the reason this benefited East County cities is we were being averaged with Portland. Well, Portland's had a lot higher real market value growth than we have. And so since they have 80 to 90% of the real of the value in built structures, they were the one driving it rather than us. So you can see that first year residential CPR was 49% countywide. For Gresham and for Wood Village, it was above 60%. And then you saw similarly for our multifamily and commercial industrial. And that makes a huge difference. I mean, it was a big difference when we calculated how the byway was coming on the tax rolls. When we ran it with our change property ratio rather than the county, it's 20% more revenue the first year and every year after that's on the tax rolls.
And it made our overall tax increase for that year appear more like 6% than 3%.
Yeah. And that's because the summary statistics don't break out existing versus new. So what does that mean for Wood Village? So I worked on some modeling from some summary statistics to figure out if in any of these property classes, if we grew by more than 3%, we assume that was new growth. And that was kind of the simple model that I started with. So you can see what happens, 2018-19 wasn't a huge year for us, but the important thing to note is that we get 3% a year every year after on that new growth. And then what that new growth is calculated on, if we had used the old county change property ratio versus the one we actually had. So it's that differential is kind of the new revenue to us. And this is just for City of Wood Village. So you can see we started getting some more development. I think this is when Riverwood started coming on the tax rolls. We'll be getting, I think the byway will hit this fiscal because it's as of January 1, 2022. And so the byway on January 1st, 2021 was still construction in progress. It wasn't on the tax rolls, so we didn't get that data. So next year we should see a huge hit in our multifamily. We should make a huge difference, but you can see every year this gets larger. Overall, we think that if things continue, it'll end up being this total change from this legislation will end up being about 4% more revenue, property tax revenue by 2030. So by the time we hit 2030, this number for us, that would be $40,000 or $50,000 a year, just from having new properties come on at this higher ratio. But we're not the only ones who tax on property. The county does, the school district does, Metro, all the special districts for the library, the East Multnomah County Soil Water Conservation District, everything. And so, and it's not just us, all four of these county cities did that. And so what I did was I looked at kind of that same model applied to Fairview, Troutdale, and Gresham. And I met with the finance directors for those three cities as well and talked through this to see kind of proof testing. Because this makes sense to us because we can see when Riverview came on, we know what the development activity is within Wood Village. So it seemed reasonable. But so we met with them and kind of talked through that and said, well, if we apply this to all of the four cities, what does this mean for actual revenue? And so based on that, you can see, this doesn't start out as a lot of money the first year, but every year it grows. And with some fairly conservative projections for development, by 2030, this is an extra $10 million a year in property tax revenue to all the jurisdictions that provide services within Multnomah County and specifically East County. So just like how we dug the hole that we're in 1% to 2% a year, this helps kind of, I don't want to say stop digging, but we're not digging as quickly.
Yeah.
We're not digging as quickly in our hole.
And how does urban renewal fit into this, given that part of our city right now is not paying any of the extra property tax to the library, the Metro, the schools, the special districts?
It impacts urban renewal as well because a couple of years ago, we actually wrapped up the incentive for the byway, and because it's a recent example that impacted change property ratio. Their incentive was based on what the anticipated tax values would be at the close of the period. And while we saw that it was a higher number, 18-19, we were talking about the byway, by the time it actually closed out, that number had declined down to, I want to say 0.48.
Yeah.
Somewhere sub 50%, which then they got less money than they originally thought because they took longer to complete the project, but there was higher investment. So, I mean, it was to say a wash per se. All that to say is though, that rate was still higher than it would have been had we just stuck with the county one. And so while urban renewal is not getting as much as we thought originally from a few years ago, it's still more than we would have. That money then at the close of the agency will trickle into then all those overlapping tax districts again at that higher rate, because that's the key piece. When a property gets that change property ratio and is assessed at its first, that's where it is forever plus that 3%. So if you assess it at 100,000, it's 100,000 forever plus 3%. If you can get it to 125, you capture that 25 plus 3% forever up until it's either a significant remodel, otherwise destroyed, removed, etc. So the fact that we were able to get that different ratio for our city helped urban renewal. It will help then the other taxing districts when the agency closes.
And ultimately what will happen with that is what that will mean for urban renewal is urban renewal lasts as long until we collect all the money that was authorized, the 11.5 million. What this means is that we're going to collect that money faster, which means those properties get back on the tax rolls a year earlier, which was the other thing that impacted the assessment, the incentive for the byway is with the byway development. Obviously, all that money gets captured by urban renewal, which means we collect it faster, which means instead of the urban renewal projected being winding down in 2032, it's now 2031. So that means it just goes back on the tax rolls a year earlier.
And that is something to note with the development we've had with Riverview South, the byway, a few of the other projects. We will close out the agency with if there are no other projects. We will get all of our 11.6 million. Pretty remarkable.
Well, yeah, and yeah, because a lot of urban renewal agencies renew because they never made it to maximum indebtedness. And I suppose it's good news for those overlapping. Is there any way that a budget committee in the future could decide not to divide the taxes because there's years left in the agency Or is it just the maximum indebtedness that control? Does that trump years? I mean, do you automatically end?
So what the example that you're thinking of is in terms of rolling that over, I believe so there are some different rules for urban renewal districts that existed in 1997 because they had already bonded and made commitments underneath the previous tax code. And so some of those were grandfathered in. And I believe what Portland does with those urban renewal areas is they're rolling as many of those over as they can because it keeps generating money. Ours was not on the tax rolls in 1997. So I think we would not be able to roll it over unless we increase the maximum indebtedness, which would again have to go out for.
And I think that's where you see like with Troutdale's, for example, when they extended theirs is because they hadn't had any development. So they hadn't reached their max indebtedness. Rockwood, I believe, was in a similar situation where development took longer than initially thought to redevelop in that area. So it was extended because they hadn't reached their max indebtedness versus we'll call it the Portland model where they can just keep the machine running.
The machine, no. So that's kind of the impacts to House Bill 2088. Talked a little bit about the property tax problem. Don't want to keep you too far after dark. So I'm going to wrap up real quickly. This is Bob the Builder. Yeah, I watched a lot of this I have a young son. Can we fix it?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
He
we can.
gets a lot of work done with only 4 fingers.
You know he does. So Gresham kind of pioneered an approach. So I would also say House Bill 28 is the first time since Measure 50 that anything with Oregon's property tax system has changed. That's the first time that anything of this system that was set up had any sort of tweak. So kind of describe the problem of why change property ratio is the part of the system, at least from service provision, that's broken. Going back and looking at that underlying language, I've been working with a couple of groups that are trying to work on property tax education form. We asked the question, well, if area was defined in the Constitution, it was area in the Constitution, countywide statute, you can change that. What else can you change that would not require a constitutional amendment? And so there's a question that I've posed to Jeff of there's nothing in the underlying constitutional amendment that says you have to recalculate that change property ratio every year. That's something that's in statute. It's not necessarily passed as part of the constitutional amendment, nor I think you could argue was it intended that was what people were voting on, which is kind of the argument Gresham made, which was people weren't voting on countywide, they were voting on area. And so area can be defined, you could define it statewide, you could define it countywide, citywide. There's a lot of different ways of defining that. And that discretion was left up to the legislature. If we didn't recalculate this change property ratio every year and kept that, the ones that we had in 1997, we wouldn't have that constantly declining ratio. It would just be, you build a house in 1997, you pay 75% of your real market value, and that's your tax base. You build that same house in 2020, you pay 75% of whatever it costs you to build it, that's your tax base. That seems, I've asked the question of, is there any reason why that isn't equitable, or why it wouldn't pass the same fairness challenge that they were trying to get at when they created this ratio that doesn't work? And I can't think of one of how that inherently is less fair to people. And so the league, one of the work groups with the league is looking at what statutory changes might be able to be made. There's some ideas out there where they would like to take House Bill 2088 and extend that to the entire state, not just Multnomah County. The downside of that is that doesn't, that might slow the digging, but it doesn't really stop the fundamental problem. And so it's great for East County cities. Portland actually, if they wanted to do it, if they wanted to do that, would actually lower their CPR because as I was trying to convince the league, half of cities are below average. So half of them would not benefit from this change. Because I always like to tell people, half of people are below average. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. There's half that are below average. Half of cities are below average, half of cities wouldn't benefit. Like that's just the basic ratios. So there's talk about that. We've met with Gresham to talk with their city manager and some finance folks to kind of float this idea. And the reason why we're bringing it up to you is that the next legislative session starts in, what is it, February?
February.
Wanted to see kind of give you guys an update on kind of what we've been working on behind the scenes. That's not all of kind of what that committee is working on, but just kind of take a straw poll of, is this seem like something that we could push? And whether or not you guys are interested in us having more staff time than I've already squirreled away from important things like audit and utility billing, trying to understand this and kind of work on it.
That's what are you doing with Liga? Or
Yes, I harass them periodically.
what is that? So
They have a finance and revenue or finance and taxation policy committee. And that's the one that I'm on. I'm also on the water and wastewater infrastructure.
on that subcommittee, you've had conversations, I would guess.
Yes.
And is there anybody that said we shouldn't do something about it? Because you have people from other cities, I mean.
I think I'm gonna try and, but as the night gets later, my filters start to deteriorate. So I'm gonna have to try and put a couple of them back on to make sure that I'm being diplomatic. This is a big issue. It's something that people have tried. The league every 2 years for legislation. Property tax reform is one of its top priorities. But it took kind of Gresham doing an end run by themselves to get anything changed. So there's been, not that the league hasn't done a lot of work, it just hasn't. It's a big problem and people start bumping into, you really want to make any change, you're going to have to do a constitutional amendment, which means you're going to have to do a campaign. You're going to have to.
But you're saying we don't. I mean, our council is advising that we may not have. Right.
Greg generously offered up to 8 hours of Jeff's time to analyze that question.
He must have gotten that question before.
I don't think he had. He was actually quite interested and willing to actually delve into the details. And he was a little disappointed he couldn't be here tonight to listen to the presentation because I believe he said there really isn't a reason why this couldn't be done statutorily, which I think is a unique view and lens that hadn't been thought of before. As Seth had said, the league has tried to push some manner of tax reform. And I believe it was always thought it would have to be meaningful, to have to be constitutional, which is a huge bar, huge barrier. And given the league's resources, what are they going to spend the priority on?
And they have dedicated quite a bit of resources. I think over the last 5 years, they've spent $200,000 or $300,000 on polling on property taxes. And they have another poll that they're going to be working on to try and figure out where they can navigate and what the path forward might look like.
Well, I mean, even before this presentation here, property taxes are not sufficient to provide service. And if we, I don't know why we wouldn't try to do some work on this.
Yeah.
And the question becomes, I would guess, how much staff time, but we deal with it all the time with not enough resources.
Well, we're either going to be spending staff time trying to fix it or trying to manage the problem every year as it.
While I don't understand the entire graph you just went through, I do know that for everything, all the years I've been in education, the money is going down.
Yep.
And the costs are going up.
Yep.
And it's primarily or significantly because of our tax system.
And the league has tried reaching out to the school districts because I think for a lot of time, the school district's attitude was, well, the state backfills us from the general fund if we don't get enough property taxes. But at some point, I think we're starting to hit the practical limit of what the
They
states.
don't always back it.
Well, yeah.
They don't hold schools harmless, but
Yeah, John would know
Yeah,
far better than any one of us here, but yeah, just, at times on the budget committee, they don't, if you got young teachers, they dock you from the school fund and it's like they're two separate funds, school fund is the largest source of income for schools, property tax is the second largest. They don't really commingle.
When I think that's kind of the next step we're looking, Seth has done a lot of work. And so the key point is there'll be more work and basically taking this on a roadshow to other area partners, whether it be other cities, schools, other jurisdictions that can make a push for
do we have
this,
to do a lot of convincing with our neighbors?
for them to understand it.
it is, yeah.
And I'm not diminishing their ability to, I'm not saying they're not smart. It takes a bit of time. It's a couple of hours to really sit down and realize what this does.
They understand they don't have enough money.
Yeah,
They know
that.
So, and nobody, most of us, Seth, I appreciate your expertise there, and I relied on my chief financial officer all the time. We do understand we don't have enough money. And they don't have to understand all the nuances to it. They got to understand that there is a potential solution.
Yeah.
There is an avenue here that with a consolidated effort, a joint effort, there's a chance that maybe some change can be made in a couple of years.
And I did reach out to Gresham about the people who worked on this in 2017 and they had a little kismet in terms of like, they got pretty lucky that this bill went through and it didn't garner a lot of opposition. The assessors opposed it. And then the home builders also opposed it because it would ultimately raise property taxes, but not on existing homeowners. It would. And the interesting thing in working with the league, because the league has a lot of resources for the Department of Revenue. One of the things that I think comes out of this is I was expecting that statewide property tax revenues would have declined since 1997. The reality is they've stayed pretty steady. And I'm trying to look into that. I think what ends up happening is what we talked about here a couple of weeks ago. Cities start running out of money. They can't provide services. Well, what do? You form a park district, you form a fire district, if you look at the number of special districts that have formed since 1995, there's been a lot of them. And it's not because, operationally, it would be great if we had a combined fire district. This is the only way for us to get additional property tax revenue. We can't do it any other way than forming a district. And so I think that a lot of times that's what's driving a lot of these special district formations is cities and counties and schools are locked out of being, other than doing a local option levy, which you'd have to renew every 4 years. And it's hard to provide a continuing level of basic services on that. If you really want to solve your problem for the next 20 or 30 years, you form a district.
Well, I'm supportive of next steps here. Trying to work with our neighbors and with, at some point, school districts. That's a big deal. I mean, it's a big task.
Yeah.
But I don't see any downside to beginning to put this at all. I don't know my colleagues here.
I don't either. I think this is a great opportunity. As a few weeks ago, we talked about, I know they were talking about shared services, but I think we should look at a bigger scheme of how do we partner together again to better our communities. And like you said, the biggest topic was we don't have enough money. And if this can help alleviate some, that's a great step on its own. So I think presenting this to neighboring staff and say, hey, get on board, and then get the other councils on board to push it.
Yeah, just periodic updates and had a three-city meeting on fire service.
Yeah.
That's down the road here. Meeting, so anyway, that's, I support it.
And I also talked to you, one of my next steps is, we did get we paid for and provide some property tax roll data out of the county. So we've got kind of a way to, rather than just using summary statistics, go property by property to help refine the model, which Greg and I were talking would also help if we do end up moving towards a fire district, trying to figure out what the right rate is now and in the future so that you can set that up for sustainability. So it's not just an application for this. It would help with some of the other big questions that you guys are going to have to make decisions on.
And I mean, could this be a topic for our retreat? And could this be, we're talking about staff time, could this already be a P item?
It depends. I mean, our retreat's in February. The session will have just started.
I mean, because
At least for this round, I think what's going to be baked will be baked for this session, but who knows what stage this may set. I think we'd be able to say, oh yeah, we're going to make a push and they'll get passed. And I wouldn't think that would happen this session, but I think it could set a stage for some other conversations, maybe at again, probably not short session, but the next one, maybe it's already cooked and baked and ready to go. It'd be great if this passes this one. I'd be pushing for it.
Again, it's like most things we try to do. You laid it out for us, council, and now we'll go back and work on it.
We'll work on it.
And come with a plan that says if we're going to do this, then here's how we can do it. And it means that Seth is going to Salem more often. It means that we're going to have a little higher attorney's bill. It means that we might need a little consultant help. We may spend a little money with the three cities, just that stuff. But I'm ready to hear how we might proceed with this.
I think that's why we tried to partner with Gresham first. They have a lobbyist already.
Yeah. So
Yeah, because if you, I mean, I'd like to think that we don't lack either imagination or frustration. So if there are a lot of statutory tweaks to make out there, then we might have made them already. Because, we're not just now noticing this problem. But it does seem to be that an annual change to the change property ratio is kind of the way to go. Because like we said, to make big dents, it's got to be constitutional amendments. And I don't think you get to constitutional amendments until we're at kind of scorched earth. I think people would have to see that change property ratio decline to the point where you are saying to people, yeah, you can build a new house, but the fire truck is not ever coming to your place.
yeah, the fire. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't
Stand and watch their house.
Put a map up
you don't
like
you
this.
don't
Getting that.
you don't get benefits.
Yeah. At your own
And,
risk.
I'm hoping the tipping point is before that.
Well, we're not the first one off that cliff.
But so yeah, no, I'm all for
Okay.
focusing on pushing that.
Right.
It really is, I think a very elegant option. I was going to call it solution, but it's, one piece of a larger puzzle. Oh, and Jeff was able to log in and hear some of it. It simplifies the process. One thing we struggle with is trying to anticipate what the change property ratio is going to be, any given year for projections. We know we have new growth or development. What's that really going to do? We don't know because it depends on when it gets assessed and what the ratio is at that given time. And you can't predict what the ratio is going to do. We joke that they put some stuff into a black box, shake it up and pour it out. That's not a bad actually explanation of how it's done. So it creates some simplicity. It doesn't impact, current property owners today. There are impacts for new development. But, the person concerned about, grandma or grandpa living in their home, they're going to get taxed out of it. That's not a concern with this. It checks off a lot of boxes.
Yeah, it's not. And it's and as far as the cost of doing business, it was saw that, it might track with CPI, but not with inflation, right? So, I mean, the cost of doing business is just different. now than it was in 1995. And so, you know, you what I don't get is that, while property taxes were going up, it's, this doesn't seem to me like it's a regressive tax, okay? Property taxes are going up significantly. Everyone benefits from it. You know, we saw it in 2005 in the housing rush, and we saw it just now as values went up. Shoot, in 2005, the values of condominiums were going up. The values of mobile homes, I know they don't pay property tax, they pay property tax or personal tax, but the values of those were going up. And so, you know, it's like, you know, everybody benefits when values increase. And so having to pay something based on that benefit just doesn't seem regressive. Sure why we necessarily have.
Okay, well, that's the end of my presentation. Come back for another session in a few months.
Okay.
How's it? I'm just waiting to be dismissed.
Yeah, no, thank you, Seth. I'm sorry. Counselor Minor is looking to be dismissed as well. He's got to get to a family event
I
with
do.
his son.
And I'm going to be real quick here and just give a quick update on our small city grants from ODOT. I was at a meeting yesterday, and as you know, my first meeting, they decided that that grant money could not be used on county roads. I appealed it and been talking to them since the last meeting. Yesterday, with Greg's help, I had a map and I walked specifically through where we might spend that money, and it was exactly on the map you saw tonight on a crosswalk. You know, they know we're already building too. So there were two members that are staunch believers that you don't spend any city money on county roads. County has enough money. They got all the money they need. So, but they got to a point. My summary is we got to a point after about 35 minutes, and with the help of Deanna Edgar's boss, the ODOT supervisor, that it was tabled. They all liked what I had to say. And I didn't have the votes, but we got it tabled, and I'm gonna go back. She's gonna plan another meeting, so I'm gonna go back and hit it again. Just try to get it that we as a city can spend money on county roads. And what I'm doing is the uniqueness of Wood Village, which is compared to these other cities, and the ability to work with our county. Okay, so we're working with our county, and with their support, we can submit an application that says that we can meet the grant guidelines. So that's where I'm at right now with that, on that committee. So,
Well, whatever you need prior to next meeting, just let me know.
well, the stats you sent me, I mean, I gave them a good picture of Wood Village, you know, poverty, income levels, the Multnomah County. I read them the report on the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office and the people trying to cross Wood Village Boulevard. And they listened. I mean, they were very attentive, but I didn't. We weren't able to get it over the goal line. At least I'm hopeful we can. I do. Thanks for.
Thank you, Counselor.
Actually, you know what?
I got family in town, and they're kind of waiting for me to. You know.
We got nothing left on the agenda, so we might as well adjourn before Lindsay has to type that you left early.
Okay. Thanks. And let's see, this is November.
We don't meet again until December 13th. Well, but we have the tree lighting on the 3rd.
Yes, tree lighting, and I'm gonna actually go to Fairview as well as Woodville.
I'm glad you finished that sentence.
Yeah.
I'm actually too hurt.
The 3rd, yeah, I'm actually gonna go to.
I'm gonna go Fairview.
Thanks, yeah.
I think they got a better tree anyway.
Can't get the lid back on.